What's up, everyone? It's Rafa here, and I wanted to do a short review of today's morning session because I think there were a good amount of order flow related nuances that I think are worth pointing out that helped keep me on the right side of the move today. I was able to make some good money in the morning session. We had a great day in chat today, so it was awesome. It's also fantastic to see people calling out things and seeing that people are understanding the tools and whatnot. So really appreciate people's participation in chat. It's great to see. It also gives me confidence, sometimes that I am seeing the market correctly. So anyway, let's dive into it. We had today's session. It's right here in the market profile. Basically, we opened here at the orange line. That's also right here. Did a bit of business, and then we just never looked back. That's like your first nuance, if you will. But I think the more important nuance early on in the session, apart from this, is the tech chart, right? So this is all of tech, like the Max 7, and it tells me between yesterday's close and today's open, what's the percentage difference on tech. So I use this a lot to determine my bias, and today we open positive above 1%, basically. So that's usually a pretty good indication. We also had a strong breadth today. We had, on average, probably around 8 to 1 on both the NYSE and the NASDAQ. So something that's very useful to me as well. This is part of the studies as well. So if you're interested, you should set these up. But anyway, so we opened, and early on in the session, noticed a few different things. Let me go over to GEX. Let me zoom in a little bit. So these charts they're synced. So let me go right before this large market order right there. Okay, so early on the session, there's a good gap between the blue line and the red line, meaning that calls are dominating, and they're continuing to dominate more and more. It's something I like to see. It can change very quickly early in the morning session, so you have to take it with a grain of salt, but it's still a piece of information that's quite important. So that was happening, which had already my bias being bullish along with tech. This is SVIX, so SVIX was also gapped up. Ultimate bias, I'm not going to talk about that right now. So as the session opened, we ranged a little bit for a few minutes, and then this large market order came in. Typically, I like to see a larger market order. 400 plus is better, 500 is even better. That's as big as you'll typically see them, especially when they're just initiating a move. And anyway, you just mark this as a line in the sand for yourself. So you just mark it right here, wherever it came in through. So I have to sort of eyeball it. So you kind of, what I do is I just put my mouse over here and I look, okay, it's about 43. I mentally mark that. And we did do a little bit of business down here, but not a lot. And then we just never look back. We traded above the open. We traded above the pre-market high. And we traded above this level that I had, 50. So big level. And to me, it was, we're just going to be long until we trade under 50. And we just didn't really do any business below that. So switching over to GEX, GEX kept trending higher and higher. Eventually, at some point, one thing that was very important for me, right through here, call GEX, as price dipped a little bit, call GEX kept climbing. And typically, you'll see call GEX climbing and make higher highs, which is great. But you also need to see that, this is DEX, by the way, but call GEX was doing the same thing. You want to also see that coincide with total GEX making higher highs. If not, you can't get married to the trade or being long, because things can change very quickly. But right there, DEX made a higher high. Total GEX hadn't yet made a higher high, but we saw this happening over and over. Where right there, total GEX made a higher high. To me, that's a huge signal, because it typically leads the market also making a higher high. It gives you a chance to get in, and at least you're targeting the high, which 12 points or so, depending on where you get in. Or if once it starts moving, you can get in there. Which if you're just targeting the high, that's close to 10 points. Anyway, they're fantastic trades because they're just easy, high probability. If you wait for a previous low to paint, and then we start trading higher, you know that you can put your stop right there, and it may come take you out, and that's okay. And you have the confirmation that as long as these lines keep printing higher and higher, the market's going to go higher. So this, to me, is it's fantastic. Super, super valuable. You do have to be watching this extremely close, and it can be exhausting sometimes, but it makes you money. Switching back here, there was another nuance here that I noticed, as we were starting to, as we dipped, call GEX made higher highs, total GEX also made higher highs at some point, maybe through here. We had this limit order here, you can see it in blue. It was roughly 800 and so lots, which typically, because it's of that size, I assume, and this is just from me watching the market for many, many years, I tend to decide if those types of orders are looking to get filled or if they're indicating, almost like broadcasting to the rest of the market, we are going higher. They don't always work out, but I would bet that 4 times out of 5 they do work out, and they typically don't get filled. They typically just, again, they're kind of like a warning or signal to the rest of the market that somebody is in control and they're going to push the market higher. So it's just better if you join them, and we can all do this together and we can all make money. That's how I think about it. It may sound silly to some of you, but I've watched this for many years, and that's my conclusion. Okay. The higher highs on DEX and GEX on both the calls and the total lines, they just kept playing out over and over. I'm not going to go through all of the different setups, but I called it out on chat a bunch of times today, and I think people listen and they make money. So another interesting thing that occurred today, which we don't see every single day, is one of the put lines. I think this was CHB, which is the bot puts. Somebody started buying a lot of puts, or not someone, but maybe just a bunch of people started buying a bunch of puts. You can see like the little spikes right through here as well. They coincided with the line moving higher. It was likely all one trade, but it was out of the money. Why was it out of the money? Because we didn't see the spike or maybe it was at the money, but it wasn't that much. That was probably it, because typically if we do see a spike down on CPR, that means that it was at the money or near the money, and we did see the spike down, and these lines spiked up. So my conclusion would be that it was at the money, but it wasn't sizable, because otherwise we would see that this one would also spike, the pink line would also spike down if it was sizable. It just affected the deltas and the gamma quite a bit for whatever reason. I'm not going to go and look into what traded there exactly. But anyway, it capped the move, right? It came up here, capped it, pushed lower. Then, even though this person was probably still in their trade, the ones below traded more, and that's why the line moved. So the line moved, and that, I look at that as it opens the door for the market to move higher. And we started seeing the same thing of total GEX beginning to make higher highs, call GEX making higher highs, DEX, call DEX making higher highs. The calls, which is the blue line, will lead total, which is the gray line, making higher highs. The total making a higher high is a confirmation that price is going to make a higher high, right? So maybe like right there, just right there made a higher high on DEX. Maybe like somewhere around here is where we made the higher high on call GEX, or sorry, on total GEX. And if you just target that high, I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but 5 points is 5 points. And if you weren't already getting into the trade earlier on, you can still get in, target the high. Somewhere around here we made a higher high, I think. Maybe we didn't, but the same thing kept occurring, so it just made sense to continue to buy the dips. So that was another little nuance. Another thing that occurred here also on the reconstructed tape, as we kept pushing higher, what is dominating? The buy flow. You get a little bit of sell flow, which is fine. You want to see that continuous buy flow, almost as the balls continue to move away from your screen. You want to see new blue balls, new buy balls show up. And anyway, it was just a fantastic morning session. Really enjoyed it in chat. Like I said, I'm not gonna. Oh yeah, there was this other section here where a few of us started noticing that something was up, because here price made a higher high, but call GEX did not make a higher high. Total GEX almost made a higher high. Now total GEX can make a higher high because the puts can move lower. Even if call GEX stays flat, if the puts move lower, that'll push total GEX higher. So that's something to keep in mind. Here DEX also made a higher high, but later on you can see these other two, they didn't really make higher highs here. In fact, there was a lower high across the board on all of the lines except for CPR, and eventually CPR did make a lower high right through here. price kept pushing higher, and we also noticed this, this zone right here, where you see the spikes on the red and the spike down on the CPR lines. What this indicates is that somebody traded size at the money. So this tells us that it's sizable because of the spike on the pink line, and this tells us that it's at the money because of the spike down on the blue line. So you can think of one as size and the other one as money impact. And then, you typically just see that across the board on DEX and GEX. What we've seen many, many times is that when this occurs, price will trade in the opposite direction, and then it'll trade in the direction of that trade. Every single time this thing has worked out. In this particular case, it took a lot longer than it typically does. And I was starting to lose faith on that trade, but we traded once we started getting under 97. I shared that in chat early on before this dip even, and once we pushed below, I got short. It was defended, and a few of us made money there on that trade, whoever traded it. And yeah, I'm sure there was a lot of other things here on the footprint and the tape that I can probably cover, but I'm not going to cover everything. So the last thing I'll mention is that I just love seeing these lines work. It's just out of nowhere, news comes in, and these lines just seem to hold price. In some cases, once we pierce through it and come back and back test it, we'll then push higher. In this case, once we pierce down below it, the probability was higher that we would push lower. And sure, maybe there was some news headlines through here that helped. We also had the GEX and DEX cross right through here. They crossed the zero line. So a bunch of different, confluences that give us probable direction of where the market's going to go. And then these lines, well, actually, let me touch on one thing. So price moved higher here. Typically, towards the end of the day, we won't see call GEX. It's maybe 40% of the days where we'll see call GEX actually making the move with price. But as options are losing value because of theta, both puts and calls start, trickling closer and closer and closer to zero. So you want to start focusing on the total line after, say, like 1:30 or 2 p.m. Eastern time. And you also want to put a lot of weight on the CPR line, this purple line. So you kind of have to like shift your focus. So I wanted to call that out because I know probably, earlier in the day I focus a lot on these lines, and then, they seem to be pointing down while price goes up, but really you want to be focusing on this gray line. And then anyway, finally, we did test this level again, defended, which is great to see. Also, whenever these put lines move up, we had a bullish day, kind of like a trend day almost, and put lines move up. This typically signals to me that this downside is capped. We're not going to be trading below, and if we do, we're likely going to push back higher and then close somewhere inside of the box. But anyway, everyone, I wanted to share this with you just for educational purposes, and hopefully this helps you. You have to be on your game and watch this stuff closely to actually make use of it. Anyway, guys, thanks again, and I'll see you all tomorrow.